Thanks, Ashley. Hello, everyone. Today we are exploring rendering in Navisworks, a somewhat underused and underappreciated feature. Why would you try to render in Navisworks in the first place when there are other tools that are better suited for that task? Well, you might want to if you're already a Navisworks user. It's your primary tool, and you don't use any of the other tools where we would typically perform a task like rendering. But if you need a rendering and you already know Navisworks, you don't know how to use any of the other tools, nor do you have the time to get trained to use one of the other tools. So why not use the one that you already know how to use? You just need to learn one more feature, so the learning curve would be quick. And we also want to do as little extra work as possible, right? Now, you won't get the exact same quality of the results that you might get with some of the other tools. Those others were purpose-built for rendering, though. This feature is not a #1 feature in Navisworks, so when people think of rendering, they typically don't think of Navisworks first. However, sometimes we may need to crank one out in a timely manner, and if Navisworks is what you're familiar with, why not leverage it? And the last reason I think of where you might want to do this is that you don't need the highest level quality, but you just need something to move along. And probably the most important reason is usually we need it right now. Now that I've mentioned why you might render in Navisworks, let's look at a quick comparison. We're used to the typical appearance when exploring a model in Navisworks. It looks enough like it should for day-to-day use of the model. You can tell what things look like, but it's just not realistic, and that might be okay. You might want to render if you need a shot that's closer to presentation, but not to the same extent as something formal or executive level or sales level and things like that. Maybe you just want to give your view a facelift. Also, we want to do as few steps and as few clicks as possible. Models in Navisworks typically come from Revit, but they might also come from AutoCAD or 3ds Max or maybe Inventor or possibly non-Autodesk programs. In all cases, the ideal place to do things that have to do with rendering, like materials and lights, is in the source applications. That way you don't have to be responsible for that in Navisworks. After all, Navisworks is typically used for review and coordination and clash detection and things like that, and not for design. Although it would be nice to be able to see the real thing when possible, even in Navisworks. Since you can do all this in Navisworks, I'll show you how, so that when you do receive models from your partners that don't have lights and materials and other things like that, you can still include those. I'm going to show 3 examples today. The first one will be one that has almost everything included. There's a model from Revit, one from Plant 3D, and one from Advanced Steel. All the lights are there and enough materials for this purpose here. Typically, lights and materials are not done in Plant 3D or Advanced Steel. And for the sake of rendering, that is. Those users of those tools don't need those, and really they don't care. However, they may need to know what kind of materials are being used, but the focus is not their appearance. The second example is the same files, but without the lights. So we're going to pretend that the Revit user provided the building, but hasn't gotten around to adding the light fixtures yet. But you have to proceed with your work. So we'll be adding a few lights and working with them from inside Navisworks. The third example is a scene from 3ds Max. In case you weren't aware, a scene from Max can be exported to a Navisworks cache file. So when all the lights and materials are in place, all you have to do is hit the render button. Let's get into Navisworks and get going. So here is our first example. There's a building. All the light fixtures are already in place. We've got some structure coming from advanced steel, and we have some equipment and piping that came from Plant 3D. Now, I did a webcast not too long ago on Revit, and we went a little deeper into rendering, and the first thing we did there was to just go hit the render button and see what we're dealing with. We're going to do the same thing here. So the first thing I'll do is go to the Render tab and click on Ray Trace. And we'll just get the lay of the land here. Now, rendering behaves slightly different than it does in some of the other tools. It does a ray trace, which is a form of rendering, which is more interactive. So once it is turned on, we can watch the progress. We can also continue to work with the view. I could pan, orbit, I could change the perspective on the fly. Every move that I make, though, the ray trace is going to recalculate as I'm doing it. So it is still active. If I wanted to stop and work on the model itself again, I would need to click stop. So you'll be seeing me doing a lot of that. I'll be stopping, I'll be ray tracing back and forth. Now, this is the first one we've done. As you can see, not much has changed from the regular view. So that tells me I need to make sure that I'm looking at the right render style. So I'm going to hit stop. And then, since nothing really happened when I ray traced it, let's go over to the Viewpoint tab. And then on the Render Style panel, let's look at the lighting setting. Right now, the style is set to headlight. That is the default. There are 4 choices here. The one that works best when we want to do some ray tracing in Navisworks is full lights. That's the only one I use. It seems to provide the most realistic and accurate representation of the lighting, the materials, and the effects that that has on your view in Navisworks. So we're going to lighting, and we're setting full lights. As you can see, we can now see the effect of the lights from the Revit model here in Navisworks. I can also tell that there is an awful lot of light. So whenever you essentially turn the lights on with this setting, the next thing we want to do is dial up or down the effect. What I'm referring to here is an exposure setting. And so we'll go back to the Render tab to work on that. And then we're going to turn on Autodesk Rendering. Autodesk Rendering is a palette in Navisworks, same as Clash Detective, same as the Timeliner, the Animator, Properties, the selection tree, and everything else. I do have it docked on the side of my screen here, so it will collapse for me when I don't need it. So here we are. On the rendering palette here, the first thing I want to do for a scene like this is I want to turn down the lights. It seemed to be, washing out the scene. This is also an interior view. As you can see in this particular model, there's no windows, there's no light coming from the outside world, so there's no need for me to have the sun turned on. There's no reason for Navisworks to have to calculate that if there's no light coming in from the outside. So we're going to turn that off. We're going to uncheck the box here. I could also use the sun button at the top here. So if I'm on a different tab in the rendering palette, I can still turn the sun on and off. All right. Also, notice that I have the settings for the sun and the sky collapsed right now. I'm going to expand those just for a moment. And when I do that, you can see that it does open up a lot of settings. So if I'm not using something, in this case the sun, I'm going to collapse that rollout so I don't have to look at that. I'm also going to collapse the sky since that's on the outside. That way, all I'm looking at are the settings that I need to deal with. And the one I'm after right now is the exposure value. So I'm making sure that exposure is on, first of all. And then I'm only focused on the first slider bar here. I'm going to grab that slider bar and I'm going to start moving it around. And notice if I drag it to the left, the scene gets brighter, so it's even worse. If I drag it to the right, it gets darker. Now we can start to see a little more accurate what the lights ought to be doing. I'm imagining that it's not super bright inside this building, but it's also not super dark. So I'm going to set this around here. I'm just eyeballing this right now. It looks like a setting of around 12 might be okay for this scene. So once you adjust your exposure value where you want it, I'll just click outside the rendering palette to close it. And then we'll do another ray trace. I am ray tracing on the lowest quality setting, just to help with the time here when we're setting things up, just like we would in the other tools. We want fast settings so that we can make sure that our lights are working and things are appearing the way that we want. And we don't want to have to wait for that. If it does seem to take too long and you've seen enough, you can always click stop. You do not have to let one of these ray traces finish every time. All right, so I kind of like the way this looks. I can see everything. The materials are coming through. Lighting looks okay. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this again. Now, once you finish your setup, you've done your full lights, you've maybe tweaked your exposure, and you've run a couple of test ray traces to see how things look, then you can switch to a more final result. To do that, you'll click on the drop down for the ray trace command, and you'll see the out-of-box settings here. Low quality is the default. It never hurts to check this setting first before you start. And then once you're happy with your settings, then you can increase the quality. Now there's 3 settings here, low, medium, and high, and they work just fine. You don't have to mess with those settings, but they don't tell you how long one of those ray traces is going to take. But the second 3 will. This one here called coffee break rendering, that takes 10 minutes. It's relatively the same as quality as you're seeing here, but now we know it's only going to take 10 minutes. The lunch break rendering takes 1 hour, and then the overnight rendering will take 12 hours. So if you're ready for something as close to presentation as possible, you can go with an overnight rendering, but make sure you don't start that rendering until you're going to be away from your computer for 12 hours. There's also a custom setting, so if you wanted to do your own thing, we could do that, but we have to go look at the settings for that in order to get what we want. So in the rendering palette, we'll go over to the settings tab for a moment. Here are all our presets, and here's the custom one. Now let's say if we wanted to render something and we only want it to take 1 minute. Instead of rendering the way we are here, we'll set the render time to 1 minute, or however many minutes we want it to take. So maybe we want the happy medium. You don't want to wait 10 minutes, maybe you do 5 minutes. And then you can also tweak your lighting calculations and so forth at the same time, and get still a test render that's a little more than low quality, but not 10 minutes long or an hour long. From day to day though, I normally just rely on the low quality, and then when I'm ready for output, either the lunch break or the coffee break is typically enough for most purposes coming out of Navisworks. It's not a result that's going to go in a brochure, or you may not even show it in a meeting unless it's a regular review meeting with the other designers and engineers. And most of the time, they can live with what Navisworks shows us from day to day. All right, so I want to make sure I'm set to low quality for next time. Now, once you're ready to produce your final render, once it's finished, you'll choose the export button, and then you'll save that image and you can share it with the world. For now, I'm just going to stop, and that will conclude the first example. So that's really the workflow to get you started with rendering your views in Navisworks. Let's change to our next example, which is the same models, but this one does not have any lights in it yet. So we're pretending that we're cart before the horse right now. We need to move on in Navisworks, and the designer for the light fixtures hasn't had the time to place the lights yet. So we're going to add some of our own lights and go from there. So we're not going to wait for those. We're also not going to add all of the lights that you saw before. That won't be necessary to add that many. You'll be able to do this with just maybe 3 lights or less. We're also going to focus in on that piece of equipment that's on the top level here, just to do something different and to speed things along. I do have a saved viewpoint for that piece of equipment. So this is the view we're going to do our ray tracing on here. And we're going to add the lights just above this piece of equipment. We'll maneuver them, for whatever makes the scene look the best. Now, over in the render palette, we're going to switch to the lighting tab for a moment. And this is the tab that will have all our light information on it. When you're looking at lights that have been imported, like we did in the other example, those will be listed here. We can turn each of those lights on and off, or we could delete them if we're not using them, and that's what we're going to do here. So I'm just going to delete those. So right now there are no lights at all in this particular model. Next, we're going to set the viewpoint and the lighting style to full lights like we did before. Now we can prove that there is truly no light in the scene. Now, if we were to go ahead and ray trace this, we'll still be able to see, because Navisworks won't leave us with a pitch black environment. It might be close, but we'll still be able to tell that the scene is not being lit, which is what we're seeing here, and that's fine. So we'll stop that, and then we'll go to work on the lights. Now, to do that, we don't have any physical lights in the scene. So while I'm getting things set up, I am going to go back to the lighting style, and I'm going to choose headlight, which is the default. Most Navisworks files, that's the lighting setting. It's always been set. We just never went and looked at it. So I'm going to set that for now, just to make sure everything is easily visible. And then I'm going to switch to a top view and get outside the model for a moment. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to hide the roof. I want to be able to see down inside the building for a moment. I'll hide the roof. I'll bring it back in just a moment. All I want to do is see that piece of equipment so I have a frame of reference to place the lights. So we'll go back to the lighting tab. We'll go to the create light command, and we'll create a point light. These are the 4 types of lights that you can create in Navisworks. They're pretty common. You can do this in all of the other applications. I could use spot. Distance is this type of light is good if you wanted to do your surrounding light. For example, if you wanted to emulate the sun, you could use a distance light for that. Web lights will allow you to bring in the photometric files, just like you would if you're doing lights in Revit or any of the others. For this example, I'm going to stick with point lights. So I'll choose point, and then I'm going to select right over top of the equipment. And as soon as I do that, you will see the effects of that light in real time. So if I move this light now with the gizmo, the effect of that light will be visible right away. I'll set that right over the center of the equipment, and I'm going to scoot it just a little bit to the right, because I'm going to pretend that it is still hanging from the truss. I'm going to place a second light. So we'll go back to create light and point. And we'll also place this one in relatively the same area over the equipment. And I'm going to pull this one out front a little bit. So basically we're going to shine some light in this area here, and a little bit extra. Now, once you've got your lights placed in your top view, just zoom in and get kind of close, and then you can just manually orbit your way into your view, and we'll get down to the type of view where we can adjust the height of those lights. So we're going to pull these up just to give the impression that they're hanging from the ceiling or from the rafters, etc. And then position them where we want. And you'll be able to see how they're bouncing off the nearby objects. So that's the next step. After you position your lights, then we'll go back to the lighting tab, and you'll see your two lights listed there. If you select it from the list, it will highlight out in the scene for you, or you could select the glyph that you see for that light, which is right here, the blue ball. Keep in mind that those are visible in the scene, which means if I were to ray trace right now, those blue balls will be visible. We'll turn those off in just a moment. What I want to do first, though, is I want to select each of the lights, and I'm going to look at the lamp intensity. So let's say I've got my light, it's the right type, it's in the position I want, but it's not bright enough. To brighten the light itself, just that one light, we'll use the lamp intensity. So we'll choose the edit button for that, and I'm going to raise the intensity to about 10,000. As you can see, that light is now shining brighter in that area. Let's repeat that for the other light and do the same thing. So that'll lighten up the scene that way. We're not using exposure right now because when you set the exposure, that changes the exposure for the whole view. When you do it for each light, you use the lamp intensity. So you could have one really bright light if you want, and you could have a light that's not as bright. And you could get really granular here. Just be careful. You don't want to spend a lot of time doing this with all the lights if you have a lot of those lights. Also, I want to point out that I did make this change individually for each light. In Navisworks, it is not possible to select multiple lights and make mass changes for lights. That's one of the downsides of creating lights in Navisworks, and that's why it's typically done in the other tools like Revit, because you can do it much more quickly. But if you do need to do it here, then you can. I just recommend that you don't put, say 50 lights in on your own, because then you have to manipulate those lights individually. Also make sure that their checkboxes are on so that they are going to light your scene. All right, now once we are done with our ray trace, we want to make sure that we turn off the light glyphs, which are the blue balls. That way they will not appear when we do our ray trace. All right, we're done with our lights. We'll go back and use our saved viewpoint to hone in on that, and then we'll do a ray trace and see what we have. All right, so it looks like I forgot something. We did switch to the headlight style to add the lights. As you can see here, it just looks like almost the same thing as before with the shadows casted over here. So let's hit stop. Let's go over to viewpoint, and then to the lighting style, change it to full lights. And then we'll go back to render and ray trace. Now that looks a lot better. I think it's bright enough. We've got good focus, and it looks like things are behaving now. So once you're happy with your lights again, let's shift our focus to the materials for a few minutes. There's materials on the building, but not on the structure or the piping and equipment. The equipment is still that ugly blue. It's just what color it came in at. It's just a color. Let's add material to the equipment. So we'll stop our ray trace, And then I'm going to select that piece of equipment and go over to the rendering palette again. This time, let's go to the Materials tab. Now, in the Materials tab, you'll see a list in the top section under Document Materials for any materials that were brought in when you appended your models. For example, this gray material here, or this concrete, that's what's on the walls, and some of the others are applied on their objects. I don't like these materials for something like a piece of equipment, so what I'm going to do is use the search bar and look for some aluminum materials. So as I start typing the keyword aluminum, we can see down here in the bottom half of the dialog in the Autodesk library, all of the materials that contain the word aluminum. So I'm going to use one of these for this example. I'm going to use the aluminum flat. To load this material into the document here, the document being your Navisworks model, we're going to click the arrow down here in the library to add the material to the document. Then, since I already have the equipment selected, you can right-click on the material and assign to selection. This workflow is the exact same workflow in all the AutoCAD products as well as Inventor. It's similar in Revit, but only the interface looks a little bit different. But you still have a document materials area, and you have the Autodesk library down below. Very easy to navigate the materials from one product to the next. All right, so that takes care of the equipment. Let's do the same thing for the piping. So we'll select on the pipe. We'll select those four there. And we'll clear our search from aluminum so we can see the document materials there to see if there's anything there you might want to use. If not, we'll do another search. I'm going to do a search on steel materials now, because I don't like the two that are in there. They seem like they'll be too shiny and just not the right appearance for piping. So we'll look for some steel. There's plenty to choose from in the library. For this example, I'm just going to use the regular steel material. So we'll add that to the document. And again, we'll right-click on the material and assign to selection. So now we have material assigned to the equipment and the pipe. Let's do another ray trace. I can already see the effects, so I'm not seeing the blue on the equipment. I'm also not seeing the other generic colors on the piping. So a little more like the real thing. All right, so we're going to pretend we're done working with those objects. Let's shift our focus to the level itself. This is supposed to be a grading material for a mezzanine. It's pretty common. But the problem is, I've stood on some grading before, but I've never seen the railing reflecting off of the grading. That just doesn't seem like that's the real thing. So we need to work on the material for that. So we'll stop the ray trace. We'll select the grading to get that ready. We'll go back to the materials. We'll clear that last search. And I'm going to start searching, and since we all call this grading or something to that effect, so I'm going to start searching on the word grading. Problem is, there isn't a material in the Autodesk library that falls under that keyword. However, there is a handful that have the word mesh in their name. So if you search with keyword mesh, you will get these 5 materials here. I've already looked at all of these. The one that is the best fit for a mezzanine is plate mesh 1. So just remember that material. If you are going hunting for the appropriate grading, you want it to look, exactly like it should, this is the closest representation. So we're going to add plate mesh to the document. Then we'll right-click and assign to selection. And then ray trace again. You'll see the difference. Now that surface up there looks a whole lot more like grading, but I don't think it's quite right. It does look like grading, but it looks very thin or very fine. It seems to me that we can see too much below the grading. So something is off. So we'll stop the ray trace. And I'd like to show you how to edit a material. So we can get the materials from the library, we can assign them to our selections, but what if we need to tweak the material and make small changes to it? So back in the Materials tab, you'll highlight a material and choose the Edit command. And what I notice about this particular material is it has reflectivity turned on. It doesn't seem to me that a material like grading should be reflective in our renderings. So we'll simply turn that off and do another ray trace. You'll see the difference. The grading is going to look a lot thicker, a lot more like the real thing. I find this appearance to be sufficient in Navisworks, so I don't worry too much beyond what we've done so far. So once I get to this point, my lights look good. I've set the materials the way I need. I made them look, done my tweaks like I did with the reflections there on the grading. Once I get to this point, this is when I'll stop that ray trace. Then I'll change my quality to whichever rendering I'd like to get out of that. Once that's done, I export the image and share it. Before you pull the trigger on your final render though, remember, early in this example, I hid the roof. So if that is going to affect your view, if you can see the roof in your view, in this case, make sure you go back to the Home tab and unhide those objects before you pull the trigger. All right, so I'd go back to render, and this is where I would do my final render and go from there. So that's our third example. We've done one with lights, we've done one without lights. Now let's go to our last example, which is a scene coming from 3ds Max. This file has already been appended. It was an NWC file that was exported out of Max. It's a straight export. You don't even have to do any options or settings or anything like that. All of the objects are already in place here. So all we need to do is go to the Viewpoint tab, set to full lights, and then ray trace it. And since we're still in test mode, let's look around the scene for a moment. We do have a lot of windows in this scene, which means we should consider setting the sun. So we have the effects of the outside lighting on our scene. So we'll stop this ray trace. We'll go back into the rendering palette and go to the Environments tab and then turn the sun on. Notice the difference as soon as we do that. So we're already getting an effect just by clicking the checkbox. And we'll ray trace again. And you can see the difference. Now we can see the sky. We have an effect of the incoming light on the floor now, and it gives a little bit more of a realistic look to your view, even though we're not doing full-blown rendering like someone in Revit or Max or one of the other tools, what they would might do. Now, if you want to brighten the scene from here, there's two ways you can do that. You could do that by adjusting the exposure. Remember, that does it for the entire view, so your lights will get brighter or darker, the sun gets brighter, the materials get brighter, everything gets brighter. You could also do it by adjusting the sun itself. So let's expand the sun rollout again. And we could adjust the intensity factor of the sun, and only the sun will get brighter or darker when we do that. We could also change the position of the sun. We could do it manually with the azimuth and altitude settings. We could also do it with geographical settings, which means we could set our location by the address of the project, and then set the date and time, and that will position the sun accordingly. I prefer to just go with the relative lighting and work with the intensity. It just matters, how you want the light to come in through your windows. So if you don't care about casting the shadows, which I don't normally, I just want to make sure it's on and it provides some effect, but it's okay with me if it's not the exact position of the sun, with respect to the project location. That's entirely up to you what you do here. Mainly, I just want to make sure it's on and I'm getting some light coming in from the outside. So maybe we'll brighten this up just a little bit, and we'll do one last ray trace. So for me as the Navisworks user, if I can see outside, it looks like the sky is there. You can see the horizon, we've got light coming in, all the lights are working. I'm happy with that. So this is one I'm liable to finish with and then export and share it with my team. For now, I'll go ahead and stop this. And once I'm done, then once I share that with the team, then I'm all finished. That's our third example. And I didn't want to take you through all of these extra ones here because they do take too long. However, I have done shots of these ahead of time, so we can compare those now. So the first one I did was the coffee break, which took 10 minutes. The lights and materials look pretty good. You can see some shadows, and if no one cared, I could live with this one. But look at the area above the equipment. It's very dark. We know there's lights up there, but the light up in the rafters has not been calculated. And that's one of the trade-offs of doing the short-term renderings, like the coffee break rendering. Yes, it only took 10 minutes, but it didn't fully calculate everything. And there's also still some graininess on the equipment and other surfaces. If we zoom in on this image, you would be able to see some pixelation more than with the other renderings. But that is the trade-off for getting a faster rendering. Here's the lunchtime rendering. This one took an hour. But there's a big difference here. It's not fully lit, but this one's probably good enough. We can see up into the rafters. So it's a lot more accurate than the last one. And there's a little bit of pixelation here and there, but it's still a very nice shot, I think. Shadows are also a little more accurate. They're not as blunt as they were in the other one. And overall, this is a pretty good rendering for the minimal amount of work that went into it. Here's the overnight rendering. This one took 12 hours. It looks great. There's no grainy materials. The light is softer, even though the scene is brighter. And the reflections and the shadows are a lot more accurate too. We can clearly see above the rafters, which means all of the light got calculated on this one. And that's the reason that it took 12 hours to produce. So again, if you want this level of quality, make sure you start a rendering, the overnight rendering at the end of the day. You don't want your computer to be crunching all day long on a rendering from Navisworks while you're trying to do other things. You could take a performance hit with your other applications, so be careful. I always make sure that before I leave the office, that's when I start it, and it's finished when I come back the next day. I have some tips for you. First, remember when you bring in your models to get started, go to the Viewpoint tab and set the render style to full lights. That will make sure that the view will render correctly. Next, go to the Render tab and make sure that you're set to the low quality ray trace while you're getting things set up. That low quality ray trace takes 1 to 2 minutes at most, so you can do all your testing very, very quickly. On the Lighting tab, Make sure you hit the light glyphs button just to confirm that the lights are converted. So you want to see those blue balls at first. You also want to make sure that all of the lights that you want to function, make sure that their boxes are checked. That is an on-off setting. So even though you have lights in the scene, that doesn't mean that they're all on by default. So make sure you check that list and turn on the lights that are part of your view, turn off the lights that aren't part of your view. That way they don't get calculated. Now, once you're done setting up your lights, make sure you turn the light glyphs off again. Otherwise, you'll have all those blue balls visible when you ray trace. And you don't want to run, say, even the coffee break rendering that takes 10 minutes. You don't want to run that one and then find out 10 minutes later you forgot to shut the blue balls off, because then you got to do it all over again. So be sure you turn that off when you're done with setting up your lights. Next, decide whether or not you need the sun. If it's a scene like our first one where there were no windows, you can just shut the sun off. If you have windows and light coming in from the outside, then you'll want that on and make the necessary adjustments for how much light. You want it to look more like daytime or nighttime. All this will vary from one project to the next. The one thing I always do is make sure I turn those light glyphs off. A tip about exposure, mainly, don't forget about it. It's on the Environments tab, along with the sun and sky settings. If your view looks washed out, you'll want to increase the exposure value. If it looks too dark, you'll decrease that value. If you adjust your individual lights, you'll use the lamp intensity. Now that is a per light setting. So if there are a lot of lights in the view, be careful. Remember, the goal here is the fewest steps possible and the fewest clicks possible, so don't get caught up here by setting the exact wattage or intensity for every single light that's in your scene. All right, so a little bit about setting up Navisworks as a whole at the install level. In order for Navisworks to digest the objects that are coming from the AutoCAD products, you'll want to install all of the available object enablers. That will ensure that those objects appear correctly. The link shown here is where you go to download those. As an alternative, though, if you export to NWC first from AutoCAD, then this won't be an issue. Because when you have the NWC file already, you can append that instead of the DWG, and all of those objects will appear correctly whether or not you have the object enablers. But I still recommend having those installed. Just keep in mind that if you decide to export to NWC from the AutoCAD product, next time that model changes, your AutoCAD user will have to do another export of the NWC. So it won't be a live update like we're used to in Navisworks. Also, when you have a lot of models appended into Navisworks, you may notice longer load times when the source models are still being worked on. You can get around this by saving your Navisworks file, your NWF file, as an NWD. But only do this if the source models are done changing, because once you save as NWD, that breaks the link with the source file. So your Navisworks file won't update as changes are being made. So keep that in mind. Lastly, I'd like to share our online resources with you. On our YouTube page, you can find the recordings for all our previous webcasts. This one will be available shortly. Plus, we have plenty of articles on our blog at hagerman.com and even more content on our customer site. I'd like to thank all of you for attending today. Now we will answer any questions left over from the chat window. So anybody that has any of those questions, feel free to key those in now. I'll wait just a minute or so if anybody has a question. Okay, it appears that there are no questions, and that's fine. So I will turn this back over to Ashley.
Okay, thanks, Brett. This will conclude our broadcast. If you think of additional questions later, you can simply reply to that confirmation or reminder email you received from GoToWebinar, and we can get those to Brett or your sales rep. Once again, if you could take a few moments to fill out the survey, we would appreciate it. It will just pop up as we close down today. And thanks for attending. Have a great day, everybody.